So I wanted to talk, maybe share with you some reflections on what this year has been like for me, and maybe then allow you guys to have a chance to kind of share what it's been like for you. Just a couple of little bit about some background information. There are about 3.8 million deaths from COVID in this last year in the whole world. We're sitting at about 533,000 deaths in the United States. And Stearns County, where we live, there have been about 208 deaths in Stearns County. There have been about 19,000 cases here in Stearns County in the last year of COVID. And in the United States, we're kind of hitting at about 29 million. Those are kind of pretty staggering numbers when we think about a year ago. We were detecting our first cases of COVID, and our first patients were dying from COVID. So what a change this has brought to all of us and to our lives. And, you know, things have really changed from a year ago too, right, in terms of how we treat COVID. We didn't have testing a year ago. We weren't quite sure how we kind of take care of the really seriously ill patients. And now with kind of, with being able to care for them, we're much better at that. We're much better in the therapies we use in the hospital with high flow oxygen and non-pressure ventilation, as well as passive antibodies and immune therapies and dexedrine, which is a steroid. So we're getting better in how we position patients who are in respiratory failure. You might see some pictures of patients laying on their stomachs, which help their ventilation and stuff too. So in the acute setting, we've gotten a lot better how we kind of care for these folks. We now know it's more available so that we can test people if they do have COVID. We've developed this incredible vaccine that's highly effective. From the very beginning, all we really had to start with were public health measures, right? Initially it was wash your hands, distance yourself, and don't touch your face. The mask wearing didn't start out right away because we wanted to save masks for the healthcare people. We thought there was a shortage of everything, and you probably had a shortage of toilet paper in your house. But things have really kind of, it's incredible in terms of how, with science and technology and willpower and working together, we've kind of come to this point. So, in terms of reflecting, I want to reflect a little bit about kind of some of the things we've lost. I want to share with you just some reflections of, I'm the medical director at Quiet Oaks Hospice House, so what we've done there in this last year. I want to talk a little bit about what we've gained also during this year, what have been some positive things. And then talk a little bit about grief and loss and share a few kind of ideas about that, because this is really a global generational tragedy of loss. And it's a collective grief. It's all these individual losses that we all have, as well as a community, as a society, as a world we've experienced. And we've, at least in my generation, I don't see any 100-year-old people out there, but none of us have really experienced where almost the whole world has been affected in very similar ways. So those are the things that we'll kind of cover, and I'll try to keep it to maybe 20 minutes, and then we'll also kind of have time for kind of input and questions.
Is it not listening to you?
So this is just a picture reflecting on kind of just how, you know, how immense it has been. But the flags and the memorials and whatever that we hear of, what they really represent is, you know, not only the numbers of people that we've lost, but just think about it. These are really important, wise, valuable people in our society that are no longer with us. Now, not all people who got, you know, what I'm trying to say is that not all that 500,000 people, some of them would have died anyway because of age, right? But there are many that probably wouldn't have died and would still be with us. And so there's been a real loss of human and that component. And it really kind of overshadows to me the numbers that we talk about. And you've probably heard this has been said quite a bit. There have been more people, this is a cemetery at Normandy. And that if you count up all the deaths in World War I, World War II, Vietnam War, 9/11, there are more people that have died in this country this year from COVID. So it just explains a little bit about that. So this is a picture of Quiet Oaks. And Quiet Oaks, if some of you are not familiar, is an 8-bed residential hospice facility. So a year ago, when we found out that, we have COVID, and so as a community resource, our decisions were, how do we stay open? How do we care for people who are dying? How do we change the way we care for people at the end of life? And so there were many changes that we need to do. That first weekend we talked about we got to put in some protocols and changes. The first thing that we talked about is, we need supplies, right? So on a Friday, we put out an email to kind of our members, or just our volunteers, asking for the following. And by Saturday morning, the office was filled with toilet paper and cleaning stuff, and I'm sure we all kind of raced ourselves to the grocery store to get this stuff. But so it has been really a community effort this whole year. People have been helping each other to kind of get through it. The other thing we had to do was we had to kind of protect ourselves so we could protect our patients and our families. So our staff began wearing goggles and masks and gowns and gloves. And we instituted these infection control policies where everyone coming into our house had to be screened. You've gone through this temperature and symptom screening. And we wanted to limit the exposure in our house because we found out that some of this is spread asymptomatically. So you could come in and not have a temperature, not have symptoms, but you could still be spreading COVID. So it really was this decision this whole year of how do we try to keep the house safe so we can care for our patients. But if you're gowned and masked and have goggles on and you're taking care of somebody at the very end of life, it can be very impersonal, and that's not what we're about, right? So how do we kind of incorporate some of that? So like many healthcare institutions, what we did was to have everybody have a picture with their name badge. It doesn't take the place of actually seeing the whole face, but it at least was a way to know that this is who is this person taking care of me? Because of restricting the number of people in the house, we had to restrict families and who could come in. And so we, like many other places, went to window visits where families could come and visit the patient, but they'd be outside the house. Initially, we defined families as immediate family members, so husband, wife, and their kids, but not grandkids, and not grandparents, and not brothers or sisters. And so, again, that was difficult for us to not allow all the people that wanted to kind of be there at end of life with a patient. But again, like you may have experienced at the hospital or in long-term care, we had to kind of take those measures to keep things under control. But I think we did a good job, because we have had no patients, residents that have turned positive with COVID this last year, and we've been able to stay open, and we've our niche has been kind of taking care of COVID patients who are in that convalescent phase. So they may have been in the hospital and maybe 10 days out from first onset of symptoms, and so we've taken care of these patients at our place. So just a word about loss and grief, a couple slides, that there are times when there are too few words left to heal us, when what we wish for is to be carried, when all we have left is the hope that tomorrow will be a more gentle place to land than today. And this is from C.S. Lewis. No one ever told me that grief felt so like fear. I'm not afraid, but the sensation is like being afraid. The same fluttering in the stomach, the same restlessness, the yawning, I keep on swallowing. At other times it feels like being mildly drunk or concussed. This is sort of an invisible blanket between the world and me. I find it hard to take in what anyone says, or perhaps hard to want to take it in. It is so uninteresting. So there have been many losses that we've experienced, and I'm sure you have too this last year. Personal losses. You may have someone who's died and has passed, either a family member or a friend. Certainly the whole sense of how we interact with each other, the whole touch part of being human. We haven't been shaking hands, we haven't been hugging each other, we haven't been kissing our grandkids this last year. The idea that really the freedom to travel, the freedom to go out and have a meal, the freedom to gather with friends. And we've kind of, in a way, most people have recognized that allowing that the public health is more important than those individual freedoms to let me do what I want to do, because that helps to kind of control the illness and the disease. We've missed out also on the rituals around important moments in our life, and the rituals of getting married or graduating or deaths or funerals. They've been taking place, but early on in the pandemic, they were very limited, and even now, they don't allow all the people that need to come and to grieve and to be there for that family to happen. So you may be I want you guys to be thinking about what you may have lost over this last year, and at the end we'll kind of come back to that and talk about it. But there have been some things we've gained, okay? The picture on the right is a picture of the Himalayas. And the Punjabi who live in Pakistan and India, they said this was the first time in years they could see the mountains, because the buses weren't running, the trains weren't running, the cars weren't running, the factories were closed. And so they could see the Himalayas for the first time in many years. So we have gained some important things also during the pandemic. We really, in a way, uncovered what is broken in our nation. We've uncovered kind of the healthcare disparities, people that don't have access to healthcare. We've uncovered the economic issues. We've defined what it really is an essential worker, okay, and how hard it may be for them on the front line. We've uncovered kind of the racial divide we have in our country. So there have been many good things about pulling it back and looking at how we could be better, and the pandemic has allowed us to do that. There's been a lot of creativity, and we've seen that in many different ways. We've had to slow down, right? Slow down, introspect, focus on what is important this last year. We've learned to adapt. We've had to adapt. We've adapted here at Newman, has lots of adaptations that they've done too. And at times there's a sense of renewal. We may be drawn back this last year to something that kind of has renewed us, okay? Whether it's a project or a book we read or food we cook or whatever. There's this shared sense of vulnerability, could open our hearts to the need to transform our world for the common good. That really, it isn't just about me, it's about me being part of everybody. And COVID-19 has exposed our weaknesses as a species, as well as illuminating our connection. Another part is kind of our climate too, all right? It's exposed that, that if we don't protect each other, if we don't protect our climate, probably the next pandemic coming along will be climate change and what that might do too. So there have been good things, but it is a balancing act, right? We can think of the positives and the negatives, and if we think really on days when we're thinking more of the negative things, then we're thinking of kind of brokenness. We're thinking of kind of our by ourselves, introspecting. We think of being vulnerable. We think of being exposed. We think of our weaknesses. But there may be some days where we actually kind of have some positive energy too this last year. And so we then think of a creativity, and we think of humor, and we think of focusing on what's important, learning to adapt, renewing ourselves, opening our hearts, transforming the common good, illuminating in our connection with each other. They said that the mask and gloves were enough to go to the grocery store. They lied. Everybody had clothes on. So, we have to allow humor to be part of this tragedy, too. But just a few things about grief and loss. If we commit to loving, we will inevitably know loss and grief. That's part of it, okay? Having both love and loss is what really brings us fully, deeply alive. It makes us human. It's the whole experience, okay? It's just not just the good stuff, it's the bad stuff too. And we share this in common, love and loss. We are, and I put in quotes, a tribe. And a tribe in a good sense, that there is a social connection that we have. And many of us have traveled and are from other parts of the world. And when we're out with other cultures and other people, we say, we share the same values. They're kind of like us. They, in many ways, that is that human connection, and that's what's important. And so we are, at this time, in terms of grief and loss, we are part of that tribe because we also can experience that and understand what someone else is kind of going through too. But grief is natural. It's not unnatural. It isn't something that is abnormal, okay? It's a healthy response to loss. It's not a problem to be solved, but it's an experience to be tended. And think of the things that you tend to in your life, the things that you value the most, the things that you put careful attention to, that you're devoted to, whether it be your family or a garden or the work you do. It's important that it's that focused attention of something that we really care and value. We live alongside grief instead of overcoming it. In grief, our pain gets supported and our suffering gets adjusted. It's the people that we connect with that support us in our pain when we're going through loss, and allows us then for our suffering to adjust. We adjust to that loss. The goal is to reduce suffering and honor and support the pain of loss. So I do hospice and palliative medicine. This defines what hospice care is. I'm trying to reduce the suffering of patients I'm caring for, at the same time honoring, supporting that they're going through that loss. And I think that's maybe in some ways we are all experiencing a hospice moment this year too. So in grief and loss, we are changed by our new realities, our new life story, and we don't return to what was normal before. In grief, there's no moving on, and you might hear that. Well, we'll get over it. Just enough time will pass by and we'll move on. It's only moving with this loss. It's integrating all that has come before and all that you've been asked to live. It's this sense of transforming through loss, this sense of just not letting time kind of heal, but being healed within, so that you can continue to live a purposeful and meaningful life. And it's okay if you're not okay as you're going through this. So how do you recover? This would be more for those who've experienced the loss this year or the losses of just going through COVID. Show yourself kindness. Recovery, we talked about, is not moving on, it's an integration and listening to your wounds. It is cultivating patience, not waiting it out. It is knowing grief and loss will carve their way through you, change you. Grief and loss is easier to endure by tending to your body needs, and I'm not talking just about your physical needs, okay? We're made up of our mind, our heart, our body, our soul, our physical, our mental, our spiritual selves. So it's tending and thinking of all of that and being aware of that. Companionship, reflection, and connection are vital parts of surviving grief and loss. And this year, this is where companionship and connection has been difficult. And that's why I think this collective grief we go through this year, this will take some time, because we have not had that companionship and connection at the moment that we suffered the most. Make a list of what you notice, signs of suffering, and how you care for yourself well, so that on days when your pain is worse, you know what you can do to kind of get better. And obviously being creative also kind of helps with that too. So what I'd like to do then is, if people would be willing to read a sentence. This is kind of a blessing for the brokenhearted. And would anybody be willing to maybe read that first sentence, and then we'll kind of go through the whole one and we'll change off, other people can read it? Sorry. You might have to be a little louder too, because you don't have a microphone. Yeah.
Let us agree for now that we will not say the breaking makes us stronger, or that it is better to have this pain than to have done without this love.
Let us promise we will not tell ourselves time will heal the wound, when every day of awaking opens it anew.
Perhaps for now it can be enough to simply marvel at the mystery of how a heart so broken can go on beating as if it were made for precisely this.
As if it knows the only cure for love is more of it.
As if it sees the heart's sole remedy for breaking is to love still.
As if it trusts that its own persistent pulse is the rhythm of a blessing we cannot begin to fathom, but will save us nonetheless.
Thank you. So I bring us back to the reflecting pool. And in the words of Martin Luther King, we are an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. So when I think of this last year, one of the words that kind of has really stuck with me is the sense of we. That, we'll get through this. We are in it together. We will help each other. This sense of connectiveness is a real positive and a strength that I think a pandemic has taught us. It's a good lesson. So back to, if you folks are willing to share more something that either just maybe your reflection on this last year, or something you've lost, personal loss or whatever, or something that's been a gain or a positive for you. And we could just go around, and if you want to pass, you can pass, but maybe we can just go around and see if people have any kind of comments to share with us.
Yeah, can you repeat them after somebody says something?
Yeah.
Is that okay?
Joan.
Maybe it's a little strange, but I feel like as somebody who's suffered with depression, one of the things that I've gained is a sense of more solidarity. More people know what it's like to feel isolated or afraid of going out. And in a positive sense, just having that narrative together has been helpful.
So a sense of solidarity that's been helpful and has got you through. Art.
One of the things I appreciated about your presentation, as I reflected on that, is kind of, for me, the loss of a year and sort of having to reconstruct that. And in your presentation, you were doing that. You were talking about where it started and what we were doing and how it progressed and so forth. And I think that's kind of helpful, at least for me, to see that this year was there, and it's not just a blur of the past and forget about it, but that it is something we need to think about, sort of reconstruct and see what are the positives and the negatives as you talked about.
So the importance, the importance of just reconstructing and reflecting on the year we've been through.
I think for me, it was just learning how to grieve in a different way. Last April, a friend of mine lost her mom to COVID, and it was the first time I had done a virtual funeral, so tuning in via a computer, which is just a very different way to grieve. And then last week went to another friend of mine. Her mom passed away, and I was able to go, but again, a very different way to grieve. Everybody's masked, and you don't touch anybody, so you can't really. I mean, you learn to read, I guess, eyeballs and send sympathy via eyeballs, but it's just, again, a different way to grieve. And so kind of when you talked about adjusting to a different way, and probably will have impacts for grieving going forward for a while. And then what I've gained is the way I have really healed and found healing was out in nature. And so I have hiked and biked and walked and really spent time in nature like never before, and that has been incredible.
So this sense of grieving in a different way and how that might go forward. I think your comment about communication is important, and because most of our communication, and Art, the professor over there, will probably agree, is that our facial expressions. And when you have a mask on, people can't see that. And for the folks that I've cared for this last year who can't hear or and can't see your lips moving, it's especially difficult. And then this sense of just connecting with what's there every day, being out in nature and enjoying that. Yep.
So we're on the topic of grief, and in 2014 I went into the United States Army, and I went in as a wartime soldier, and I came out with some scars, and I have to deal with those scars every day to the day I pass, and I have to grieve the fact that I didn't come out the same person I went in. So every day is I have some sort of grief I have to deal with, and I believe that as time goes on, I'm learning to not look at my scars as a weakness, but as a strength, showing that I survived a difficult and hard time.
Thank you for sharing that. And I think also, thank you for your service.
I think one of the things that I've noticed is how, and didn't appreciate beforehand, is how important, for example, our Newman community is to us. There's one thing about watching TV on, and get your mass when you're sitting there in your bathrobe and having a Diet Coke along your side, than it is to have to get dressed and come to church. But to see human faces and interact with them is something we truly miss.
So that might be something you've missed, that sense of community and connection, right? Missing the being present with the Newman community, yeah. Anybody in the back there?
I'm afraid this might sound cynical. You talked about knowing essential workers. All workers are essential to their families. And what I've been struck by this whole thing is how easily we as a country have sort of rolled over to somebody else telling us what to do. We could always go to Walmart and buy pants or shirts, but I could not go to Halberstad's in the mall to buy the same thing because somebody defined that as not essential. And I have a really hard time with that because we've ruined a lot of lives and caused a lot of pain that I don't think was necessary. And I'm not discounting COVID. I think it's a terrible disease, but I think we overreacted in way too many ways. And as a result, we've got elevated suicides. We have drug problems that are way out of control. We have alcoholism that has gone out of control. We have violence in homes that has been accelerated through this. And I think we allowed ourselves to be directed too much without looking out for ourselves. And sorry if that sounds cynical, but that's how I feel about what I've seen go on.
So this sense of, taking away personal choice and public safety and that, did we get it right or did we go too far or whatever? Yep,
Exactly.
yep.
I have learned that, the best exercise for the heart is reaching down and lifting people up. Since this pandemic, oftentimes we like to do things in a solo effort. But knowing since this pandemic that we are all in this together has been something that has inspired in me, to reach out and, touch people who are grieving. And I've also realized that grief it's okay to grieve. It is not a lack of faith. And grief is okay. It's okay because it is the price we pay for love. Just as you have said here, that it has to do with love and all of that. So knowing that there is nothing greater than love, and showing such love to people who are down and needing comfort. So we are all in this together, and there is no solo effort in it. When we act together, there is this huge synergy and coexistence. There's nothing better than that.
So it's a great message of love is reaching down and lifting people up, and that there's great power in us working together. Yeah.
acknowledge all the pain that's gone on. We've not had a chance to travel to see our grandkids, to be able to see family and friends, not out for restaurants. Those are all things that are small things within our lives. Yet we've been able to spend time with my spouse and talk about different things and do things. I've not had a cold in a year, which is good. I've not had the flu. And I've got a sister who is isolated because her husband had passed away several years ago. And every week, my sisters get together online and we talk, and we have redeveloped that communication within the family. That's very positive, and that's something that I think we're going to continue even after COVID is done. So, mask up, even when I'm outside. No colds. I don't want another cold.
Let me make just up, Dave, thank you. So that sense of reconnecting, you know, I've taken my temperature every day for the last year because I've gone into the clinic, and I'm amazed that I've not had a temperature in a year. And I think wearing masks, our incidence of the influenza this winter has been minimal in terms of just the influenza. So you're right, we have not seen much of that at all. So, Carolyn.
Yeah, I just want to add that we're really blessed because, you know, I've got somebody in the house with me. I see other people, a friend who was widowed several years ago and has been by herself for so long, and our sister-in-law who's been isolating, and we're just real lucky. And the communication, the technology, we are so blessed because our two grandkids are 4,000 miles away. We have not been able to hug them since summer before last, and yet we see them every day because we're tutoring them, but still we get to see them and they know us. And you know, my little Hunter who's 5, every once in a while we're working on something and he says, "Nana, I love you." And I'm thinking, oh my God. And I said, you know, sometime I'm going to come to your house. And he said, yeah. He said, can I come to your house? And we're just really lucky in some ways. You know, then I think, well, okay, the mask it's not a big deal. I can live with it, you know. And yeah, the no colds are nice.
You know, I do think I think for many of us the preference would be to face-to-face personal contact and touch, but I do think there have been some, I wouldn't mention about technology, but I've done a lot of visits this year on video visits with patients and seeing them in their homes, and that kind of adds another dimension. So, well, I'm sure, who has not done a Zoom meeting here in the last year? Anybody? Okay, so there's one guy, right? Okay, right, good. So that you know, how do we use that technology going forward to really kind of enrich us, I think is important too. So. I'm aware of time. We have maybe 5 more minutes or so, but we can keep going, so for sure.
My mom died of COVID 3 months ago, and it's been difficult. Sure, she was 94 and a half, but when you love somebody, you're still not quite ready for them to pass away. So I have a lot of guilt and anger towards the assisted living. Guilt that I didn't take her home, although it would have been just very, very difficult. We are not an assisted living facility. We don't have a shower that would have worked. But I still think to myself, what could I have done? Should we have just tried it for a while at home? So I do have that grief and that guilt. But along the way, I have to say that there were helpers. So we have to look for the helpers in this, like Dr. Rogers would say. We had the activity director who, it was not her job, but since we were not allowed to go into Ridgeview and South Rapids, she and one other person cleared out Mom's apartment and took everything out, and I mean everything.
personal with us, and he said, she was a great librarian. I'm going to take special care of her, because he was on the burial detail.
Mhm.
And my sister came from Montana and was just incredibly helpful. And she was the designated person who could be with Mom in the hospital, St. Cloud Hospital. And Father Mark Stang, who gave the anointing of the sick. And I was present for that. So that was a blessing. And so I'm still going through it. Thank you.
Thank you for, I mean, sharing, really what, you personalize kind of what we know, okay? But thanks for doing that. And I think it has been very difficult for families that I've talked to this year too, not being able to get in the hospital, not being aware of what was going on, either in assisted living, or nursing home, or hospitals, or whatever. So I'll have patients who I will see that they dropped them off at the hospital, and then they didn't see them until they arrived, let's say, at Quiet Oaks, and they didn't know all the things that had happened. So it was a process of kind of going through and explaining kind of how we got to this point too. So thank you so much. How about any more at this table here? Chuck?
I just want to pick up on what Art said about missing a year, and this is insignificant kind of an example, but a year ago, this week, Pat and I had a hotel reservation in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, where the National Wrestling Tournament for Division II colleges was going to be. And in fact, the wrestlers at St. Cloud State were ranked #1 in the nation. And they went to the tournament, but the day they got there, they canceled it. Well, we didn't get that far. We never left home, but we did cancel our reservation. And so the year in between, now the national tournament was yesterday and the day before. And just yesterday, the St. Cloud State wrestlers won the national championship again. But they had to wait a year. Think about these guys who are graduating or just hanging around college for another year, even though they should have graduated, because they wanted a chance to wrestle. So last night was their night.
Yeah.
For me, the staying at home thing was a good thing. I guess I never really thought about taking time for myself. The time from 4 in the morning till 8, I usually spent planning my day and waiting for the right time to leave for the gym. And since the gym closed down, there was nothing to wait for, nothing to get ready for. So I took the time from 4 to 8 in the morning to do some reading and some reflection without the pressure of what's next. And so that was a positive. The negative was I didn't go to the gym and I put on about 5 pounds. So there's pluses and minuses, but I think the plus was just learning how to create some time for myself.
And I think we all had that extra gift of time this last year, which was a good thing, yeah. Anyone else like to share anything else?
I would just say that we were older when we became grandparents, and so we really enjoy our grandkids, and it's just made me appreciate so much more that when you wipe away all the distraction, it's your family and it's people that are, and how much I've appreciated my home and looking outside and seeing birds and being excited about snowfall and all those things that I feel like
Thanks.
I think we found out how much our children care about us. I mean, we have a lot of them, but, you know, they wouldn't come in our door. We had a lot of driveway meetings last year in the summer, but, we get more phone calls and WhatsApp things, you know, conversations and, but they were not gonna let us get it. We lost weddings, we lost Christmas, we lost Thanksgiving, all the gatherings we have, our summer gathering that we're going to do this year. But, you know, we survived.
It gives us something to look forward to, you know, from all the things that we recognize how important those events and those gatherings are. So looking forward to that. Well, it's a beautiful day outside, and we should get out there because that's what we got to get out in nature again, right? Why waste a day like this? Thanks, everybody. It's and I would agree with the thought that being together as a community is important. That we're seeing each other again, and I think that's really important and good. So, thank you for Newman for all you've done to try to foster that even in technical ways. So that's been good. Yeah.